How y'all doing? Friday afternoon. Yeah, baby. Yeah. I'm sure y'all have tons of energy, ready to go for another 12 hours. Well, here you go. Our panel's been extended. It's a 15-hour marathon. We're going to redefine human rights. It's going to be awesome. First and foremost, I want to say that the beloved person who put this whole panel together, Christina McGill, I always mispronounce your name, Christina. Enjoy. Enjoy when you watch this video. She was sick, and so she couldn't be here. So please give her some love on Twitter. She's the reason the panel is happening. That said, although we are very sad to miss her, we're blessed to have a couple new people on the panel. And the basic thing we're going to do is I'll pass the mic down just to let's do this first quick, like 30-second introduction so everyone knows who you all are. And then what we'll do is we'll tell you I'll tell you now. What we're basically going to do with the rest of the workshop is quick introductions. Then we'll have people do longer, like 2 or 3 minute sort of introductions into their work. And then we were going to have multiple breakouts, but just to make it simpler, we're going to have 2. And you can see those boards over there. So after people kind of do their opening descriptions, what I'll do is I'll have the people who are doing the informed consent and the other one, the data one, collective rights go last. The 2 people that go last, those are the 2 breakout groups that you'll be able to split into. And then you can see the 3 questions there that you're going to work on during that time. And pretty simple, you put your thoughts together, get someone who's going to talk about it, come back up, say your ideas, save the world, and we'll go from there. All right, so I'm going to pass the mic down. Remember, the first time around is the quick version, and then we'll do the longer version. Or if you have a mic, just use that.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Christina, for putting this together. I'm Parminder, Jeet Singh from an NGO, IT for Change, based in India, and we work on the intersection of digital technologies and progressive social change. Thank you.
My name is Travis Schultz. I'm a scholar activist at the New School in New York City, and I work on shared ownership for the internet, so particularly bringing cooperatives to the internet.
Yeah, I have my own microphone. Okay. Yes. Hi, Burcu Kilic from Public Citizen. Public Citizen is a consumer advocacy organization which is based in Washington, D.C., and we have about 45 years of fighting for the consumer rights, which also includes like the workers' rights.
Hi, I'm Abhishek Gupta. I'm an AI ethics researcher at McGill University and District 3 from Montreal, Canada. And I'm also the founder of the Montreal AI ethics community, which has more than 700 people who come and talk about AI ethics once every 2 weeks, taking a deep dive. So that's me.
I'm McNamee from European Digital Rights, which is an association of digital civil rights organizations campaigning for fundamental rights in Brussels for the European Union.
Awesome, thank you. I forgot to tell you who I am. My name is John Havens. I'm with IEEE. It's the world's largest technology association, kind of the heart of the engineering community, 500,000 members in over 160 countries. I'm really happy to be on this panel. I used to be an actor, and I was in all the unions in the States, in the Screen Actors Guild, AFTRA and Equity, so I'm a big union guy. I also, when being an actor for the first number of years, because I sucked at being a waiter, I temped everywhere, and I learned from the inside out, when you are mistreated as a worker, it's really not cool. So, I forgot that Christina wrote this beautiful introduction that normally I wouldn't read but I'm just going to read it, Christina, because it was beautifully written. While data, big data, and data sets are becoming increasingly used by companies to inform managerial decisions, workers' data protection and privacy rules hardly exist. Data has been termed the new gold. It is traded, analyzed, and used in marketing, advertising, and human resource management. It also provides the building blocks for AI and algorithms. In 2014, value of data flows was $2.8 trillion US dollars. 3 years later, in 2017, the World Economic Forum estimated that 90% of all data at that time had been produced since 2015. Just imagine what the value would be today if anyone could, or would or even could count it. Data is the very foundation of the myriad of new businesses and services that are increasingly individualizing many aspects of our economy and society, namely the platforms of the so-called gig economy. As citizens, we daily leave a data trail behind us. From what we search for on Google to the apps on our mobile phones, from rides we take in taxis, apartments or flats that we rent, from what we buy to our loyalty cards, our health records, phone calls to customer services. Not to mention the places we visit, emails we send, Facebook friends, and tweets that we write. Doing all of this provides companies with data about us and our network of friends. Data is simply the biggest gift we don't realize we are giving away. Ooh, that's a nice line. Totally copying that. I'll give you credit though. We also provide data as workers, our CVs, our biometric data such as our fingerprints or iris scans, and the abundant data mined on us as employers monitor our workflows. Data, or rather sets of data, from within and outside of a company are also used by management and human resource decisions. Who gets hired? Who gets promoted? Should someone be fired or cautioned? Are the workers productive today, and if not, why not? Apart from workers in the EU, who soon will have rights provisioned by the GDPR, workers across the world have no control over the mountains of data their employers collect on them. Are your health file, social media connections, union membership, or political beliefs determining factors in your employment prospects? The application and use in companies has even spurred the question whether data is taking the human out of human resources. But who actually owns the data we provide? And what data exists, quote, out there about you and me? Are workers ever asked whether they consent to this data collection? And are companies accountable, transparent, and fair in its use? These questions are hard to answer. Take a moment and ask yourself, would an algorithm hire you if you applied for your job today? With your creativity, knowledge, and ideas, this amazing panel hopes to bring some answers to these questions and some concrete ways we can go forward to fill this regulatory and managerial gap. Christina, thank you for those beautiful opening words. I need your help. Who is going to go last, and you will speak last? Who's leading the panels? I know, Parminder, you're reading one of them. Help me out. Raise your hand if you're going to be leading a breakout group.
Joe and I are doing one.
Okay. Then we're going to have Burcu go first, and you go second.
Okay, because I have to leave early for the airport. So, and I am the only woman on the panel, so I should have a right to talk. Like, I can talk as much as I can, like, they can't say anything. I am the savior, all-male panel. No one will be, like, tweeting about this panel as the all-male panel because I'm here.
That is true.
Yeah, so.
That's
Thank
why we
you.
co-opted you.
Yeah. Anyway, so apparently, nowadays we are going through really interesting times. Like there is a big privacy panic going on, especially in the US. Like I mean, all around the world with the Facebook, Cambridge Analytica fallout. Like people started to talk about privacy, their privacy. And I've been working on this issue for a while, and every time it really amazes me. Like when people talk about data, they talk about data as like data economy. Data is the new oil. Data is the new commodity. But at the end of the day, data is our data. We are not talking about bananas. We are talking about our data, the data that we create daily basis. So the importance is like the issue here is like, so we create the data. We can't claim ownership on that data. We leave it free. We share it. I mean, every day, everything we do it creates data, and then we realize that our data can be used for many ways, even the ways that we can't even think of. And then there is this privacy panic, and the legal system is trying to figure out like new solutions for the privacy panic. In the US now we are discussing comprehensive like privacy bill, which is long way down there, and then in the EU GDPR is entering into force like this week. So that's a revolution for consumers, because as I always say, like we are the consumers. This is our data, but when it comes to worker data, we are also workers. Like we all work for organizations, for companies, even for ourselves, and the amount of data we shared with our employers is huge, and we have no control. I mean, we use our employers' laptops. We use like all this, like the phones and then GPS tracking. It's very easy for our employer to know about our personal lives, our free time, and also about our whereabouts, because all these devices, they facilitate all this data collection. So what happens to that data? You know, do we know how our employer uses the data? And do we have a say, do we have anything to say about it? Because, and we're going to talk about the consent. When we sign all those like employment contracts, we give the consent. And even I never thought about how much data I share with my employer, how much data they have in my computer, and I have no control over that data. As I said, GDPR is coming into force in Europe, like this week, May 25. That's a party time for everyone, especially for Europeans. So the GDPR has certain safeguards, like, and it gives like rights and protections for the users. It gives so much like control over the data, but GDPR only applies to Europeans. So I live in the US, and it's kind of ridiculous, like when you think about it. Like, all the US companies, they're gonna protect European data according to European rules, but not our data. I mean, we are in the US, like we are US citizens, we are US residents, but we won't be able to benefit from those rights and protections. It's kind of sad, you know, because at the end of the day, privacy is a fundamental right. Although we don't have that notion in the US, we are getting there. So my organization started this campaign, GDPR for All, and we are going to send letters to companies and ask them, please protect our data as the way you protect Europeans' data. If we are doing it for Europeans, do it for all. You know, do it now and do it for all, because you are setting up systems. Like there would be two systems, one for Europeans and one for us. So we should benefit from that other system. And we are collecting signatures, and there is a form available if you need more information about that campaign. Please find me, but I'm leaving.
Leaving all the men.
Yeah, but all the information is available. So like my Twitter handle and everything. So and I really think that this is something we all need to care about. Like. So, coming back to the workers' question, like, as workers, we are all consumers, but we are all workers. What to do? Like, how do we get control over our data? How do we have some rights, and we can claim those rights against our employers and tell them, like, you've been tracking me, that's not good. But it's also important to draw the line between work and life balance. If we are all the time connected, like this will affect the health of the employee. So this is a very complex discussion, and we need to focus on the different components of it. So I'm gonna leave it here now, like I made the introduction, and maybe Joe and others can talk about the GDPR and the workers' data, how to protect our workers' data. But before that, I have to say, as we need for the privacy, for the data protection, we need the consumer movement. And for the protection of workers' data, we need another labor movement and claim the ownership of data.
So, okay. Yeah. All right, this is a hard act to follow, but I can try, male or not. So just imagine this morning when you woke up, it's the afternoon now, so you must all be tired. So you still remember when you woke up this morning and you reached over to your cell phone. I would bet if we do a poll in the room here, we would find that the sites you accessed when you started that phone, this was maybe 4 or 5 sites among us, right? So huge data concentration. And these sites are essentially owned by a group of people that you could fit into one Google bus, right? So the millions or possibly billions of us, right, who rely on these sites have no say at all about what happens on those sites, right? And that's wrong, right? So tagging on to what was said before, right? So while in the 20th and 21st century, this idea of democracy propagated on the country level, in the workplace, that hasn't caught on at all, right? So workplace democracy hasn't caught it on at all. So I guess, so my contribution here is to say that, you know, many of the issues that were discussed here, I'm coming at from a slightly different angle: privacy, all the social justice issues, access. So I'm coming through that from an angle of shared ownership. So what would happen if the workers would actually own the platforms? So for the last 4.5, 5 years, I worked with cooperatives around the world to build companies that are owned by the workers and also are democratically governed, as cooperatives are. So imagine an Uber that is owned by the workers and operated by the workers. Imagine an Airbnb that is where the residents have some say about what happens there. Or imagine something like Deliveroo, or I don't know what the equivalent is in Canada, like a delivery service run by the couriers and owned by the couriers. So these things all exist, like from Brussels to Barcelona, to the United States, to Australia, Tokyo, and many other countries. So I'm running this platform cooperativism consortium, hard to pronounce yet powerful, and which basically brings together some 50 organizations that support this idea. We just got a big grant. I'm working with the IDRC here in Toronto with Jutta Tiberanis to build a development kit for this ecosystem of businesses that I think will have in a slightly different impact, because all these issues that are discussed here, right, all the sort of declarations for human rights essentially, or claims to privacy, always depend on those in power to actually agree and, you know, regulate, which you may be in luck, but, you know, down south in the United States, it's a bit more difficult. So, you know, like coming on it from an angle of ownership is a very different story, because then the cooperative can actually decide, right, to have data ownership, to agree to privacy for workers and consumers, right, et cetera, et cetera. And these projects are already underway. That's not like some academic pipe dream. It's actually something. There are 240 businesses now doing this, with a data commons project underway, and thoughts about and projects underway for a cooperative cloud, cooperative data sharing, and et cetera. So 2 minutes.
All right. Any of the three been?
I guess it's me. I think, first of all, on data ownership, I think from a European perspective and a fundamental rights perspective, it's very dangerous to talk about ownership of an element of a fundamental right. If you went to the United States and said, you know, you can sell your First Amendment rights and not say anything political on Tuesdays and Thursdays, it would seem a little bit odd. And I think in a perspective of our work and as people in civil society, people representing workers, we need to get a little bit better at showing respect for personal data too. I strongly recommend downloading and installing Privacy Badger from the EFF website, and go around some of the websites of organizations that are campaigning for our rights, and have a look at the donations, the free donations, the gifts to Google that we're providing. When we were discussing this panel, Christina shared a spreadsheet which was kindly provided by Microsoft, with trackers from Microsoft and others. When we were discussing what we should, how we should divide our tasks, you provided me with the Google Doc. And we're imposing privacy restrictions on ourselves and on the visitors to our websites. So I think we need, I think the one thing that I hope for the GDPR in Europe is that the default, we start thinking a little bit more, that it's not a compliance issue, but when we're setting up a website, when we're going to a web developer, we can say, can you not do that, please? And have, in a real sense, data protection by design, by default, and by philosophy. The recruitment issue is a very important one, because I know I wouldn't recruit me, let alone an algorithm for my job. But there's a real issue about bias and about hidden bias, and also about accuracy. And accuracy bothers me enormously in automated decision making, because if you gather some data about me, and it indicates that I've interrupted sleep patterns because I log on to Twitter at random moments, which can easily be harvested from public Twitter, that indicates a possibility, not a probability, a possibility that I might end up suffering from Alzheimer's in a few years. Do you want to give me insurance on that basis? Do you want your company insurance to cover me? Do you want to employ me? It's not accurate, but it could be accurate enough to be profitable. And we sort of assume that that this sort of stuff is scary because it's so insightful and so accurate. But businesses aren't about being insightful and accurate. They're about being profitable. Some of our members organize a thing every year called Big Brother Awards, and they award companies and governments prizes for being bad. And there was an employment program that was given an award in the German Big Brother Awards from a company whose health app allows the employers to have a dashboard to assess how their employees are getting on. It records data via a mobile phone sensor. It focuses on stress and sleep, encouraging employers and employees to work on issues as the software identifies them. It analyzes voice characteristics, typing behavior, movements during sleep, and identifies particular departments that might have clusters of stress. And that's kind of scary. Now, my issue, when Christina contacted me first, the thing that jumped into my mind was not consent. It was partly informed consent, but more problematically, free consent. And the first thing that happened when I was thinking about free consent was Christina sending me the link, and I was going, can I opt out of using this this spreadsheet or not? And that's not even an employer relationship. So where do you draw the line? What were the consequences of that? The notion that you can say no and how you can say no is a challenge, I think, and we will be in the breakout session reflecting on this.
Are you two running your group together?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Is this?
Yeah.
No, it's good. Hello. Okay. So yeah, Joe and I will be running the informed consent breakout session, and so Joe obviously spoke about a little bit about the power dynamics that exist when we're talking about entering into a worker-employer relationship. To me, what's interesting is because for me, I come from an AI research background. So the technical sort of intricacies are always interesting to me, and I'll start with this quick anecdote on, and some of you might have seen this before, where people who are using Fitbit trackers, you do your daily jog or whatever else that you use your Fitbit for, to keep track of your health metrics. What Fitbit had done was that they had published thoroughly anonymized heat map of all Fitbit activity in the world. Seems innocuous. What could go wrong? It just so turns out that your patterns of using Fitbit from a GPS perspective, from its activity level perspective, have to say a lot about you, even if it's in the aggregate. And as a quick note, what started to emerge from that heat map within 24 hours was people found out the locations of some U.S. military bases. Why? Well, because regimented activity and people sort of running around a track field or whatever it is that the soldiers do to train themselves, and this was something that really I don't think anyone had consented to, and this is I guess it extends even beyond the worker-employer relationship, but also that that employer and organization with other organizations that are providing these tools to you. But the point that I want to make through this example, and there are many points that you can make from this example, is around unintended outcomes that you can't predict ahead of time. So something that you can have all of your threat modeling, all of your worst case scenario analyses and all of those things, and you still can't predict some of these unintended outcomes. So what's interesting to me when sort of Christina was talking about this, and when Joe and I started to go deeper into this idea of informed consent, was, well, what does that word informed mean? And I mean it both from the perspective of the person giving the consent and the person asking for the consent. So the person giving the consent, I think that's fairly, it's been elaborated enough number of times, the terms and conditions, or the terms of service. It's never clear. It's buried in legalese. And then with the GDPR, there is a push to have that be clear, have that be understandable to the layman, whatever that means from a legal perspective. I feel that it's still vague enough that people can play around with it unless you tell me otherwise. I just feel that that's still the case. But more so when the person asking for the consent, even if they have good intentions of using your data to, let's say, run some sort of an experiment, let's say it's a medical experiment or such, they themselves still don't know everything that can be. Oh, you're leaving. All right.
Give that for Burcu.
Yeah.
It's all very
Now we're a manel.
Now we're a manel, and
Apology.
I'm never sure if she says all men or old men, but
Thanks, Burcu.
So when we're looking at the perspective of the person asking for the consent, I don't think they themselves realize what possible things can come out of the data that they collect, and especially in a machine learning paradigm where the goal is in partially to search for different hypotheses. Because if you use a traditional statistics technique, you start with a hypothesis and you try to validate or invalidate it and move on. Roughly, and in a loose analogy, we're doing a hypothesis search when you're applying machine learning, because you can find other correlations that you didn't really intend to find when you sort of started out with the experiment. So again, how do you structure consent in that sort of experiment, let's call that, in a machine learning paradigm where it truly is informed, or do we have to have it be dynamic enough so that you can go back again, back and forth with the person giving the consent to continuously update that consent as you figure out new use cases for that data or new uses for it. So that's sort of what we'll be discussing in our breakout.
Hey, Parminder. Thank you. When I thought about worker rights on data, and that's what happened after Christina introduced this idea of this panel to us, and I see it in three sets. The first set of rights workers have on data are about processes. There should be transparency, whatever the data processes are or not. There should be consent. These are process-related things. They have to be there, whatever be the substantive, relationship of data. So one is the process rights, and there are two other sets which are substantive. And among the substantive one are the reactive rights. Negative rights is about what cannot be done. I mean, that's largely about the employer's control over employee. You can't, monitor health. You can't monitor, job things in a manner which can be exploitative and all that. So all those things which cannot be done is a huge set of issues which really come from the fact that there's a very unequal relationship between the worker and the employer has control over almost all the data-related processes around the worker, and therefore there are many things which the employers have to be stopped from doing, and that's the second set. Now, the third set is most interesting because that's the least talked about. And this is the political economy aspect of it. Data, as has been said, is the most valuable resource, which John talked about, and it's at the center of everything what digital economy is. And not to talk about it as a resource is a problem, because if we don't talk about it as a resource, it's not that somebody is not using it as a resource. So though Joe says that it's not okay to talk about ownership about a thing which is subject to rights, the problem is that that would be one kind of a negative rights look at rights. Food is rights, livelihood have a rights angle. All these are also economic resources. They are also bought and sold. Livelihood is bought and sold, and food is bought and sold and stuff. And they're all subjects of right. So I agree that there are some things of rights which a person should not be able to alienate even for any sum of monies, which is the right thing. But if we are not talking about the political economy aspect of rights, we are losing hugely, and that should be central and upfront, which is not happening. And when we talk about worker rights, that becomes very important. So how does the worker own or what kind of relationship of ownership the worker has about data from the workplace, from his or her own contribution to work, is a question of collective rights of ownership over work-related data, and that's the third set of data, which is what I'm talking about, the political economy rights or the active rights. And this is this third kind which we would like to have a small group talking about today, and it goes to the issues which Trevor was talking about platform ownership. And I come next to, and I will quickly do it, but we need to understand the basics of digital economy to talk about why data is important and why its ownership is important and why its collective ownership by workers is important. So central to industrial society was mechanization of physical power. First time physical power was disembodied from animals and human beings into machine, and that's what was Industrial Revolution, which changed all social, political, and cultural institutions in the last 200 years. What is digital economy? It is disembodiment of intelligence. First time intelligence comes out from human beings into large-scale machines and systems and operates in an autonomous manner without mediation by human beings. In an earlier industrial age era, it was organizations consisting of humans which took the real decisions, even if the machines did the mechanical work. But first time, intelligence is being disembodied, and that's what constitutes digital economy. And the basis of all this intelligence is data, which is being collected all the time. It's data which develops digital intelligence, which is the main resource of digital economy. And if we do not contest the ownership of this main resource, we are leaving everything to a few people who will concentrate power. And not to talk about ownership is not to start claiming rights over this central resource. And that's where we want to talk about workers' rights on data. And I'm going to quickly close. It directly goes to platformization. So everything is getting datafied. Everything is getting intelligence-ified, what I was talking about, intelligence being the core economic resource, and everything gets platformized. And if we need to control platforms, behind it is control over data. So we are still talking about a capitalist system, so I'm not talking about taking over of all platforms and all productive forces by workers. Maybe it would happen sometime, but right now I'm talking about profit-motivated productive forces, but within that, what kind of rights workers have to own some aspects of the collective rights. Because if you don't own them, there's both alienation from the work process, which is a Marxian concept, and also dispossession, because the owner of the platform takes away all the productive capacities and exploits the workers. So we'll have a very small group trying to talk about what kind of rights workers have over data which comes out of work processes. And quickly, this is not something very esoteric, because there are EU documents which are already talking about who owns IoT data. The data which comes out of machines is owned by the machine owners or the software owner or some X GE, which provides systems. So there's a discussion around who owns machine data. So similarly, there has to be discussion over who owns the work processes data and what are the rights of workers with relation to that. So this subgroup will try to initiate a very early stage discussion on this subject. Thank you.
A couple of years ago, about 3 women that worked together, and their boss was a male misogynist jerk, and they all used, it was fictional, they all used Fitbits to notice that each day at the same time he'd walk around to their desk and say, "So, are you working hard or hardly working?" And they could measure the stress that would go up when he came around and time-stamped it. And the 3 of them then went to their boss and said, "Pete, every day is increasing the stress that we have. And there's a break point with stress, you probably know this, where you can't go back after a certain point if you have repetitive stress syndrome." And they said, "Here's the point in a couple of months where this guy is going to cause our stress to get to the point where it won't be returned. He is literally killing us. Fire him, or we take you to court." And so I also wrote that because I thought that could happen. You could do it. Anyway, FYI, transition story.